Okay, it says Fire and Brimstone 101. All right, listen up, you people. So I used to go to Minnesota Twins games. Last night I said Twins, and people were looking at me like, who are you talking about? Minnesota Twins, baseball, okay. I was only 6 or 7 at the time, so I didn't know any better. So I used to go to the games with my glove. Didn't you bring your glove, baseball glove, to the games? And you know why? Those foul balls or those home runs, catch them, you know, right? So you're sitting there with your glove on for most of the game, and you're waiting and you're waiting and waiting, and nothing's happening. You're like, oh. And pretty soon the glove comes off, and then pretty soon the glove comes on top of your head like a hat for the rest of the game, because you know what? I do that at Miller Park too, by the way. I did that when I go to the games there. I bring my glove just in case, you know, these fly balls. You don't want to take your eye off for a second. You got to be prepared, you know. But sometimes the waiting gets kind of long, right? And you're like, oh man, what am I doing here? So, readiness in Matthew is important. Well, in all of them. We know in Mark, you know, when the first gospel was written around 60 AD, something like that, the temple was kind of almost on the brink of getting torn, you know, destroyed. It was more immediate. You'll notice in the Gospel of Mark, they say immediately this and immediately that, because they're waiting for the coming of the Christ, was going to happen any day. You got to get ready. Well, Matthew was a few years after that, so they're sort of, well, yeah, we've been waiting, but it's getting kind of long. You know, is this ever going to happen? You know, and so Jesus is telling his disciples, make sure that you're getting ready. Prepare yourself for that, for things. I had a great thing last night, but I can't remember it right now. But the waiting part. You read this gospel, it's very confusing. It's tough. It's a tough gospel lesson for us. Because of what it says. You know, if you're not ready, you're out. You know, and for me, that goes against the whole grain of what it means to be a Christian, right? God includes all, and those who are kind of lagging behind. Still, you know, come on, you're all invited to the supper, to the dinner, and then in Matthew's gospel, you've got 5 of this foolish. You know what the Greek word for foolish is? Morai. You know what that means? Morai? Moron? Yeah. The 5 morons who didn't bring enough oil with them. But you know what? Isn't that life? I mean, aren't people different? I mean, I know some people that plan to the nth degree for, you know, months down the road. Everything's planned out. You know, and then you have some people that fly by the seat of their pants, you know, and nothing's planned. You have some people that are like, they're great at starting stuff. You know, they're great at starting things, but they just can't seem to continue with it. And you know people like that, and we may have a lot of us here that do that. And then the beauty, the complementarity is if you can find someone who will take your idea and to see that you're running, and then continue the journey in a different way. You know, you just can continue your journey. So you have different gifts. Those who are really excited and get things going and get excitement, and then they move on to the next thing. I've had some bosses like that. The beautiful entrepreneurs, they start it and then they move on because their gifts are that. So we read about these 10, and we read about the wise ones and the foolish ones. The foolish ones, you know, a good portion of society can relate to that. Not quite ready. We procrastinate. We fly by the seat of our pants. But what gets me, and you might read this differently, throughout the gospel there's a message. And as a Christian you read into this, what do you think would you do? What would you expect the 5 wise bridesmaids to do? Share? Would you think that'd be the case, right? So why the hardcore? You know, it's, well, you know, it's Matthew 14. Then Jesus heard this. He withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. That sounds great. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they might go into the villages and buy food for themselves." And Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. you give them something to eat. So whatever you have, you share with everybody. That's the feeding of the 5,000, right? You have a little boy, he's got some fish and some bread, and say, you know what? Take this. That's all I have, but it should make do, right? So everybody was fed, and there was plenty left over. A prime example of what we hear about in the gospel lessons of sharing and being with other people through their journeys. Even if they're not ready, even if they don't have what they need, we throw everything in and we help each other out. You know. So you would think the bridesmaids would say, you know what? I think that party would be a little bit better if you 5 were part of this. I mean, let's fill our we've got, I can use half in my lamps and you can use half in your lamp. And there's 10 of us, 10 lamps lit. We should be okay. We get to the wedding party. There you go. Much better than it was if they were excluded from this. So we think about that. And part of this gospel lesson, too, is in the waiting. What do we do in the waiting? You know, the bridesmaids were tired. Obviously, they fell asleep. What do we do in our waiting times? As a congregation, we wait together, don't we? Through the good, through the bad, through the hard times, through the good times, we're there with each other, sharing with each other as much as we can. We have that gift to give. We know from reading the gospel lesson that we have that. When the journey gets long for us, and I know for me too, I need constant to be constantly filled up. Either I'm talking to people to give me strength, give me courage for the journey, or I'm reading things. You know, the scriptures are written so that people can draw strength from it. You know, if we're feeling low, or if we're feeling like lost, we can kind of come back to some things and strengthen us for the journey onward. As a community, we do the same thing for each other. You know, it was that Rosa and her daughter and her son were sitting there last night for the service. And, you know, I sit and think about Rose, and I think about Paul, and I think about in this waiting period, all these things have come to them, to her, to Paul. To see a place filled, to go downstairs and hear people talk about, you know, we're friends from Indiana, you know, and for 40 years, Paul and Rosa lived here for 6 years, and we were fast friends. As soon as they moved up here, we made journeys back and forth from Indiana. And I think, wow, that's a testimony. And Paul, you know, he's a quiet guy, you know, very humble, and he's got great stories, but he's not this gregarious, outgoing guy, but just a solid Christian. They both are. The depth of faith is amazing. In their waiting period, they do some wonderful things. In our waiting period, we can do wonderful things, and we are doing wonderful things. My algebra teacher got married when I was a senior, and we went to, the reception was at a farm. And it was raining, and there was a tin shed, and there were people in there, and there was a German band playing along, and they were talking and, you know, living it up and having a good old time. And then there was another group that were sitting huddled and kind of quiet. And my brother said, you know, it's interesting. I see the Germans over there. It's raining and kind of rotten weather, but they're having a good old time. I see the Norwegians over here. They're just waiting for the rain to go away so they can have some fun. It's just how they dealt with the waiting period with things that weren't going well. You know, what do we choose to do as a church in this waiting period? You know, we've got a lot of things that are at hand that we can do with society and with things. You know, we're waiting for the parish hall to be done so we can do some wonderful ministries, right? We can invite people to come in. We can do all kinds of things there. We can endure with one another. We can share with each other the good times and the bad times. Providing the space for something to happen. And sometimes that takes waiting and patience. And sometimes we don't get immediate results, but the results come later. In any of our ministries, and sometimes it gets tough. But it's an important and meaningful part of who we are as people of faith. Jesus is talking to his disciples and giving them a heads up that it is important to prepare. It's also important to be there for each other, to give what each other needs. Matthew's a little bit strong in his language, that you won't be invited in, but I have to believe that God is always inviting us no matter what. And for almost every funeral service, I talk about the Romans passage that nothing can block the love of God for us. We can't. Things can't. It just happens. And so the door is always open. The Lord is always present with us, even in the waiting period when it's kind of quiet, and we wonder if there's anything there. God is in the midst of all that stillness. God is in the midst of all that activity. God is in the midst of every day of our life, a part of our lives. And those who follow Jesus, whoever hungry will be fed, and whoever thirsty will be given the waters of salvation. The bridesmaids were waiting for the bridegroom as we wait for the bridegroom. We wait patiently for that to happen, but it will happen. God will be with us. God is with us. Amen.